Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Josh and Artemis Show. Tonight we have a very incredible special guest. We have Dr. Eithan Haim, who, as you guys know, we've already talked about on the show. He's a whistleblower from America. He basically blew out the story of what was going on behind closed doors at Texas Children's. And, we talk about this topic a lot about gender ideology and what's going on with children and how they're being indoctrinated into this, what we call a cult. We're really excited to have this guest on and, discuss what kind of he's been going through and what he thinks of what's going on.
Absolutely, and we've had a brief chat with him backstage. We've had some issues with the stream a little bit, so we're a bit late. So apologies for that. But he is backstage. We've had a little bit of a joke and a laugh with him as well. So it's going to be a bit of a more laid back, but also serious discussion, which we like to do on this show. We do talk about a lot of serious things, but we do put our own twist on things, and we want it to be a lighthearted thing as well. And we want to hear Dr. Haim's real thoughts about this topic, and because it is a concerning thing for a lot of people, and especially for us. We are parents, we do have young girls here, so what Dr. Haim did by exposing what happened at Texas Children's for us was a brilliant thing for him to do, and a very brave thing to do, of course. So without further ado, then we'll bring him into the show.
Make sure you guys do like and share the show and follow us on X as well, and follow Dr. Haim on X. We do have all of his links in the description.
Absolutely. Bring him in.
We'll bring him in.
Here he is.
Hello.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a very pleasant surprise when we saw your comment on YouTube. We were thinking, that can't be the real Dr. Haim, is it? We were almost skeptical.
It was the first thing I had heard about after I did the Laura Ingraham interview. I was on my way back to Dallas. My wife had told me that these people were watching the video and commenting on it. I felt, so flattered, right? It was kind of surreal, but I watched it and I thought it was great. So you guys seem very good people.
Yeah, we really appreciate that, and of course we were surprised that you've actually agreed to come on our show, to be honest. But it's a pleasure to have you here, and we did that show, of course, and we talked about your interview with Chris, which was brilliant, and we've watched it a few times now, and I've sent it to my family and stuff as well, and they've all seen it and thought it's really good, and I think it's a topic which everybody is passionate about. And everybody has strong feelings about, but they're kind of afraid in some ways to voice their concerns in a public way. And I think that's what was so great about what you did, and this story was, I think it was in March 2022 when you actually broke this story. So it was a couple of years ago now.
It was May of 2023 that the original story. Yeah, okay. But the original statement was released in March 2022, where the hospital had said that they were no longer going to prescribe hormone-based interventions for kids with gender dysphoria because of the legal risks. And, I was a surgical resident there working at the hospital, doing surgery there. And, the people who were doing these procedures had told me they were doing it. And at first, I just didn't believe that could still be happening after the hospital said they had stopped it. So, I spent weeks trying to find something that indicated the hospital had restarted. And once you look into it more and more, you realize, like, oh my God, they're not only continuing it, but increasing the frequency of these procedures, making this transgender clinic like an institutional priority. It's all happening behind closed doors.
Yeah. And that's, infuriating for people who actually need, surgery for more detrimental things, like more urgent than, somebody who just wants to get a sex change, basically. And not to mention, like, that just goes against the practice and the, what they're telling the public. So I can imagine that was really probably disappointing to hear.
Yeah, it goes to show that there's like an underlying principle when you're a doctor. Whatever you do in the hospital, you should be perfectly comfortable defending to the public. Mm-hmm. So if there's something that you're doing and you feel like you have to conceal it, you feel like people are a little bit, wary about it, then there's a very good chance you're doing something wrong. And that's exactly what happened, because after our story came out within 24 hours, the conduct we exposed, right, these transgender interventions for kids, was voted to become illegal in a bill that was passed with bipartisan support. Partly because of our story coming out. There were Texas politicians who didn't believe this was happening in their districts at their children's hospital, but they were lying about it, and we had exposed it at the best possible time.
Mm-hmm. So how did it come about then? Because you obviously went to Chris Rufo, who originally broke the story, and it was great work by him to do that. Did you approach anyone else at that same time, or did you go directly to Chris?
Yeah, I spent months, dozens of emails reaching out to other journalists, other organizations, and just didn't get a response because I mean, I'm a no one, right? I'm just some random surgeon, and I almost think that it seems like too crazy of a story to be happening in Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't necessarily blame him, right? That's fine, but once I got a hold of Rufo, it was maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before the story broke. And it's a testament to his character and his dedication to journalism, because right when he heard it, he was like, man, this is big. This could be something really good. Took the story, we did the vetting process, and then he tells me that this vote on SB 14 is coming out, a few days later. So it was it was a pretty remarkable situation. I almost couldn't believe it, because I didn't even know that law was being voted on.
Yeah.
And I mean, was the other journalists who you reached out to, did they even respond to you, or did they give you a reason why they wouldn't touch the story, or was it just a case that they didn't even respond to you, if that makes sense?
It was just a number of things. Some I'll
well,
leave it at
they're
that.
lost now. So
yeah,
I mean, that's mental. I mean, you'd think that you'd hear about this and want to be the one to bring this story forward and make people aware of what's going on in like one of the biggest hospitals in the world. So that's just
largest children's hospital in the world.
Yeah, it is the
and
largest.
They're lying about a program that results in the manipulation, mutilation, and sterilization of kids. This is going to be seen as one of the greatest medical controversies in modern history. And, I think there's more journalists who are coming out who are really, really amazing. And, I don't fault people for it. Some people have their, their priorities at the time, and maybe it didn't line up. So, I'm going to grant those people grace, because really, these are good people and they're doing good work.
No, for sure. And we've noticed a big change, really. I mean, we've debated this behind the scenes for a while. We've felt strongly as parents. I mean, we do have 2 young girls here, and we felt strongly for a very long time that this is just completely wrong. And it's taken us we've been talking about this on the show for a few weeks now, but months, sorry. Yeah. But, we've been doing this show for a couple of years, and it's only the last few weeks where we've really, tried to use our voice a bit more to raise more awareness. And it is good to see that more journalists, I mean, we're definitely not journalists, but, we do have a YouTube channel and stuff. So we've tried to use the ways we can to raise awareness for this, because it is really important. And we have noticed a big change, especially in the media now. And I'm not sure if you saw yesterday, but Donald Trump actually came out and said that if he comes into office on the first day, he's going to revoke Joe Biden's gender affirming care plan. Did you see that at all?
Yeah. I think you bring up such a good point, because more people are waking up to this, because more people are talking about it. Like a couple of days ago at the Free Press, you had another whistleblower from Washington State come out.
Yeah, we
covered that yesterday.
And really tell just a horrifying story. And you have more people who are willing to speak up, but also risk something to stand against this. So, like in my case, I decided to speak out, and you realize that there's so many people on the other side who are willing to support you. It's amazing. Like, we have a Give, Send, Go to help our legal fund.
Yeah.
And every night, my wife and I, we read those comments and what people write, and how meaningful it is to see, what people are, how much it means to them. And, it gives you this strength that you can't even believe. And it's going from this, grassroots level where it's just people like me and you, like regular surgeons. I live in a small town, and, you guys, you got 2 kids and you love them and you're just trying to live a great life. But people are starting to realize that, now is the time that you have to do something. You have to speak up. And even if that means taking massive risks, you have to do it. And now, thankfully, our politicians are also, speaking out about it. So like I saw in Alberta, Danielle Smith, which is a very important thing. Things have to start changing, especially in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bad here.
People call it Tranada, which is just embarrassing. I mean, it's funny, like, and clever.
Yeah.
But
Tranada, that's the first time I've heard of that.
You haven't seen that on X?
I have not seen that. So
I have. It's embarrassing.
That's pretty brilliant,
I live in
must
Canada,
say.
and I'm like, oh, fuck. Yeah. Or Chinada.
Yes,
seen that
that's
one as
one
well.
too, yeah.
Like it is embarrassing. I mean, we have such a beautiful country, but it's run under like just the worst leadership. And I mean, there was obviously some outrage from the policy that Danielle Smith put out, but there was also a poll and like 78% of Canadians agree with it. And I mean, I think even behind the scenes, it's probably even more than that, because like it's mental how it's such a minority group of people, but they scream like the majority. And because you see it all over mainstream media and social medias, and it's just like now being put into schools and pushed in healthcare and like by the government, it's like it's being propped up as if it's the majority of people who feel that way, but really it's like a very small percentage of the population in the world. But it's very sinister, and especially around children, like, more specifically around children, because of course, when you're an adult, like you can do as you please if that's what you choose. But at the same time, I don't think that there's enough mental health support around understanding why a person would even feel that way in the first place. Like there's so many factors, like, a lot of it is down to like abuse or trauma as a child, or even if you're on the spectrum, like autistic. There's a lot of studies that show that if they go through puberty the way that they should, which is awkward for every single person, I think. I don't think anybody loved puberty, but if they go through it, the majority of children grow out of that feeling. And so it's really heartbreaking to see what we're doing to children. And in 10 years from now, I think this will be looked back on like, what were we doing to these children who can no longer even reproduce?
And as a doctor, when you're in this situation and you see this happening and this gross violation of medical ethics, especially what was happening at Texas Children's, otherwise an amazing hospital, right? One of the best children's hospital in the world. You have a responsibility to your profession, but also a moral responsibility as an individual to do something about it, right? In order for this hospital to maintain their mission and maintain the trust with their patients, there has to be some accountability. And but I think you kind of bring up a point where it's people can't believe that this is really happening, right? Like to kids. I think that's one of the things that really I had thought about the whole situation, because when I first heard about it, it was like mid 2020 or early 2021. And it's disorienting because you think it's not even possible that people would do that to a kid. And it kind of makes you question like what the role is of a doctor, like how could doctors even do this? Because like the primary job of a doctor is to, restore and strengthen the individual's like naturally occurring physiology. You want to put them into a state where they are not reliant on the medical system at all. Like you want to make it so that people can live their lives and see you as little as possible. But what this is doing is taking these kids and putting them down a road where they're going to be tethered to the boundaries of a hospital for the rest of their lives. And this is at a time when they're least able to understand the consequences for their actions.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, you said something really chilling in the interview with Chris, where you said they're told to adopt an identity which is based on hatred of their true self. And I thought that quote from you was just chilling, but also it sums up the movement for me. That's literally what this is. You know, the change is what these kids are told they have to go through. You know, how they're influenced by their parents a lot of the time. You know, these parents are making their kids hate themselves and told that they're born in the wrong body. It's such a manipulative thing to do to someone, and to do it to a child is just, to me, it's just a crime that a parent, you know, because we obviously have two young girls here. I cannot imagine saying that to the girls here. It just wouldn't even come into my head for that to happen.
If anything, we like reaffirm like how amazing they are, and like I tell them like how amazing it is to be a girl, and how like we have our own superpowers from boys and things like that, which sounds cheesy, but like I feel like because of how much I know what's going on, I feel like I really need to like drill it in their heads, like why it is really great to be a woman, like and a girl, and like, you know, how girls can do anything and play with any toys and play sports, and like those, like it doesn't matter what you do, and how, I don't know, I just feel like I just have to give them affirmations like tenfold now.
Mm-hmm.
But what they do in their appointments, you know, one of the things you hear most often is this idea that you either have to affirm them on one side or it's going to be suicide on another. So it creates this false binary when the third option is the best option available, which is telling these kids they're perfect the way they are, that they're going through problems and, you know, these issues that they're having, like they can overcome it and they can use those lessons as they get older, and they'll grow up to be someone and find someone they love, make a family. And it's taking everything away from them at a point where they're most confused. And, you know, it's really unimaginable to think that you would put kids in families in that situation. And especially, you know, going back to like this idea that, you know, this idea that having to adopt a false identity, you think there's a reason why they call it their dead name. Like the name that was given to them by their parents is their dead name. And then the other option is suicide. So it's either affirmation, but if you don't do that, you're going to go back to your dead name and you're going to kill yourself, which is wicked. I mean, it's so malevolent that you could put someone in that position.
No, for sure. It's so confusing how we've even got here as a society to me, because it's a pretty much a new thing. I mean, you know, I'm saying about 5 to 10 years, you've really seen this change in our society. And you made a great point in the interview where you drew a comparison between COVID and how since COVID, the medical industry has effectively been taken over by, you know, it's been dominated by an ideology and not the fundamental truth. And I thought that was really interesting as well. I mean, how do you think the medical industry has changed with this? Because you've obviously seen it firsthand. What kind of changes have you noticed from, you know, studying to be a doctor? I mean, was this being taught when you were studying to be a doctor as well?
It was starting to happen. So I went to medical school from 2014 to 2018.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, kind of like the early middle stage of, you know, this transformation of our society where, you know, I kind of see it as the end point was this inversion of our institutions, where the institutions of medicine are no longer meant to heal people, but rather to make them sick. You know, the institution of justice is not to protect the innocent, but rather protect criminals. And I think the primary change that in my eyes, what happened was the focus was taken less away from the driving force behind medicine, which is there has to be a moral belief in human dignity. when you have that belief in the dignity of the individual, then all the other treatments stem from there. But if you lose that faith in humanity and like that respect for your patients, then any type of intervention becomes possible. It doesn't matter if people are in the hospitals dying by themselves without their families, or kids are coming in abused because they're not in school. If you don't have that moral foundation, then everything becomes possible. These scientists can develop any type of phony study to support whatever conclusions they want. So people always say medicine should be driven by the science, but I think that's a little bit wrong. Medicine has to be driven by this belief in human morality, and then the science comes from there to distinguish the effectiveness of the interventions in order to restore that primary goal of human health.
Yeah, it's a great point you made there, and and I think the medical industry with this topic, it has abandoned the decency of people, and the primary purpose of a doctor, like you said there, is to care for a person, to care for a patient, and that duty of care has been taken away. And in our eyes, I mean, it's a money driven thing, this. These kids are permanently tied to the medical industry, put on drugs, in some cases that they're having surgeries,
complications,
infections. Yeah. So they're permanently tied to the medical industry. And, we had the psychiatrist yesterday speak out against this as well. And it's also tied into the psychiatric realm too. Which I think is interesting, because when because this is primarily a gender dysphoria thing, and that's a mental condition. So I think it's very strange that a doctor can think that the cure for gender dysphoria, which is a mental health condition, is to have cosmetic surgery. It doesn't really make sense.
It's such a good point, because it's like this fundamental disconnect between the problem and the solution, where you can't use a solution directed towards the body to fix a problem that's seated in the mind.
Yeah.
And it seems so obvious, right? Like tomorrow, I have clinic. I'm going to see my patients. They come in, and if someone were to come into my clinic and say, I have body dysphoria. I believe I was born disabled, and it's my right leg that's causing me all this dysphoria. And if I were to take that person to the operating room and amputate their leg, I would lose my license and likely go to prison. And it's obvious the reason why, because you're using a physical solution for a psychological problem.
Yeah.
But this is something that's been with medicine, since medicine has ever been a thing. Like one of the most famous doctors in the history of medicine is this guy Galen, right, from ancient Greece, like 100, 200 AD. And his treatment for severe psychiatric disease was bloodletting, right? So a severe psychological problem with a physical solution. 1900s, you had this guy Manfred, I forget his last name, but he would, for severe psychiatric disease, he would induce this state of coma by lowering a patient's blood sugar to where they would just pass out, and then then wake them back up a couple hours later. And then a little bit after that, you would have people who started doing lobotomies, where they would physically alter the structure of the brain in order to treat psychiatric diseases. And it's easy for us to forget, but they got the Nobel Prize for that in 1949. It wasn't only the standard, but that was seen as the highest aspect of medicine.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing now is along those same lines, but it's so much worse, because it's not only severe psychiatric disease. This is a child's normal state of exploration during their early childhood, because it's totally normal for kids to, dress up, for young boys to dress up in a dress, or to play with dolls, right? It's like that's how things are. We've known that as long as humans have been having children. And somehow we've made that into a pathology. And when they go into a clinic, they're going to be told that they're the wrong gender. And 20 minutes later, they're going to be prescribed puberty blockers and hormones years later.
Yeah. I mean, so what was the process? Because you've obviously seen this firsthand. What was the journey when a parent comes into the hospital with their child? How long does it actually take for them to be put on these drugs?
Well, after our story initially came out, May 16th, there was a whistleblower who a few days later, it was someone who worked in the clinics with the doctors who were doing this kids. And she said that 30, 45 minutes later, after a really brief appointment, these kids will be put on drugs. Jesus. But it's important for people to understand that this is a pipeline. You know, this starts before, when kids are in schools, when kids are in social media. Yeah. You have teachers, guidance counselors, social workers who introduce them to these resources. And especially if you have a kid who is having problems, in school, doesn't have friends, right? They're very vulnerable. And then you give them this potential solution, something that can provide the answers to all of their problems. They don't have the judgment to discern between what's good and bad. That's what adults are for. But the adults in their lives are saying this is the right thing to do. So it starts there, and then before you know it, you get them into a clinic, and you take these parents who, are they're surprised by all this. They don't know what to make of it. They're not ready to fight back, and that's why it's so important for parents to be ready to know how to save their kids from this happening.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Like, I think it's also just like not being naive, but not even being aware, like not having that awareness. So, and in like history, being able to trust your doctor as well. So people just also might be thinking, well, doctors know best, right? So they're just kind of being led down this path until they start to really realize, or they might venture online a little bit and try to see if there's any like support groups for parents, and then realize that they've kind of already started putting their child through this path that's, big red flags, like big alarm bells that they might be making a really big mistake for their child, but they were just trying to do the right thing for them. So, of course, education is important, but like, what do you think of social media then? Because like we think that, like, especially TikTok, because youth uses TikTok, like, do you think it's impacting a lot on children, or like what kind of role do you think it plays?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, that's the gateway to it.
Yeah.
After all of this happened, there was a group of mothers in the Dallas area where I live that had reached out to me, and all of these mothers had children who were taken up by this ideology and are transgender or had detransitioned. Mm-hmm. And after all this happened, when in their own individual lives, they had tried to find resources to see if there was anything to help them get through this situation, like how they handle it. There was nothing. So they started banding together, all these mothers who didn't know what to do. And it goes to show how little there is for them. And they formed a secret network of moms, and it got bigger and bigger. And to see what it's become now is amazing. So a couple days afterwards, I met with all of them, and they told me their stories. And I thought I had an idea of how bad it was before. But when you hear these stories, you can't even fathom how bad it really is. And one of the common themes with all of the stories is it happens young, right? Mid-teens, right? 15, 16, 17 years old, many times sooner. And it all starts with social media, because they get these ideas from social media. You see these people, they're able to put on this front where they seem so happy, they seem so confident, but you can't see them behind closed doors. You can't really see what's going on in their lives. And it provides this off-ramp for these children. They think, man, I have so much anxiety, or I have such a hard time right now. And maybe if I do this, I can be as happy as this person on TikTok. So it's one of those things where I thought, we don't have kids yet, but we're planning on having them. I was kind of ambivalent towards it, but now it's like absolutely not.
Yeah.
I would keep them away from social media like I would keep them away from heroin.
Yeah, like we don't plan on it. Like, I mean, even before all this, I don't think social media is a good idea for youth. Like, they can't even, they're not fully developed in their brain anyway until 25. But consuming all this information, it's like we live in a society that's also just very superficial. It's not great for young, young teens, like to be consuming that, comparing themselves, and especially apps like TikTok where you can just kind of endlessly scroll videos. Like you're consuming a lot in a day. And it's just like we had it bad enough, like pre-social media.
Yeah, I mean,
that
we were in the MySpace days. We had MySpace,
MySpace,
MySpace.
Yeah, it's like child's play now compared to what's going on. but yeah, so like it for me, I know that like I already was like, not very confident and stuff in high school, and I didn't even have social media in that respect. Like, yes, MySpace, but it's nothing like it is today. And so, I can see, even just all this trans issue aside, I don't think that social media is healthy for kids, like, or teenagers. Like, you are going through a lot of changes, and you will be comparing yourself whether you try not to. And also you just can't, like, your brain isn't equipped to take all that information yet. And so, and then obviously you add this topic into it, and I can only imagine like what kind of spirals you do go through. And I think it has a grave impact on, on somebody's mental health. We try to limit, other than X, because it's of course for our business, but like, I try not to scroll, like, well, we don't have TikTok, call it TikTok sick. We don't have it, but like, I try not to scroll too much either, because I think it's just it's too much, and I think it does a lot more harm than good. But yeah, try to keep them off of it as long as you can. But then it's like their friends will probably have it or something, and then it's like, how do you get away from it? Really,
you can't avoid it. Yeah,
we'll try to as much as we can,
too.
Keep them in a bubble. It's fine. Bubble kids.
Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned about some of these kids, predominantly teenagers. What were the youngest kids you saw come into the hospital?
11 years old.
Sorry, can you say that again?
11 years old.
11. Wow.
Yeah, and it seems shocking to people like us, but when you look at their guidelines, the standard for them is Tanner stage 2. This is before puberty.
Yeah, true.
Before the onset. So, it seems like that's an outlier, but for them, that's their standard. That's what they're advocating for. So, right. I mean, this is a very early pipeline that puts these kids down the road where, and they always say it's reversible, but the way their guidelines are even written, it's either affirmation or suicide. So if you're put into that binary, there's nothing reversible about that. It's puberty blockers, Tanner stage 2. You do that, then cross-sex hormones, and then surgery is everything else after that. There's absolutely no off-ramp for these people. And for them to say it's reversible is a complete manipulation of what they're even advocating for, which goes to show that, the profound violation of medical ethics here is something that will be written about for generations in the future.
For sure.
I mean, the thing what always gets me about this, because this is blatantly wrong, it's blatantly illegal, and it goes on anyway. And it's, it's not just your story. We've seen countless examples now where, there was a story, and I think it was Cincinnati Children's Hospital as well. They were blatantly ignoring policy and procedure and going ahead with their gender affirming care procedures as well. So it's not just your story. I mean, we've seen a lot of examples now where schools, hospitals, governments in America, the UK, here. We talked to the Women's Rights Network from Australia on the show a couple of weeks ago now. and they told us about some of the things what are going on there. So it's a global issue, and it's a common theme which we keep seeing where, you know, doctors and things are just completely ignoring actual truths which we all know, and you know, something which you'd expect a doctor to just know like the back of their hand that this is wrong, but yet they just completely ignore it. And to me, it's just, I can't connect the dots as to how a doctor would have that into their brain that, this is the right thing to do when anyone who isn't a doctor knows it's not the right thing to do. So it's very strange.
It goes back to, I would say it goes back to what I mentioned before. When you have doctors who are no longer anchored to that moral foundation of medicine, it becomes possible. Because then you can let whatever scientific theory drive your recommendations. Because for the average person, we still live in the real world. We have this belief that another human is dignified. And because they're dignified, they deserve health. And if you're a doctor, you have to restore that health and you have to support it. The last thing you should ever do is put them into a state of pathology. So, you know, it seems like a contradiction, like a disconnect. But when you put it in terms of, well, these people just have lost their foundation in the belief in like the moral foundation of medicine, it makes complete sense, right? It's how can this happen? The only way it can happen is if you lose that. And it's not like this is, you know, novel for our time period. I mean, this is something that has a story that's been told, you know, many times before in human history. I mean, it's not that long ago that this happened before.
Yeah, true. I mean, in terms of doctors like yourself, are you speaking to anyone else in the background who might be coming forward as well at all? You know, in terms of names, I'm guessing you can't say the names, of course, but, you know, is there like a network, I guess, of doctors or people who work in the industry who are trying to find the right moment to come forward as well with this?
Yeah, I don't have anyone specifically I'm talking to, but, you know, I know for a fact that there are people who I know who are in positions to where they can do exactly what I did. And the way I see it is that the more things like this happen, where you have people like me who speak out, I'm at the beginning of my career, I'm taking this huge risk.
Yeah.
But you realize that anything that's false in life will eventually crumble. And this transgender ideology is false. It's going to come down. And there's going to be a time in the future where people ask, you know, what did you do during that time? You know, you were a doctor and you had the ability to do something. Like, you know, how did you respond? And more doctors are waking up to that realization that, yeah, they might be taking a risk in the short term. They might risk their job, or maybe like they may not be able to pay their mortgage. But the calculus is changing because they're starting to understand that the risk and the cost of doing nothing is so much greater than whatever they're putting on the line by speaking out. So, and I can sense it because there's people I talk to who they don't say they're going to do anything like this, but the seeds of resistance are starting to sprout into, you know, flowers that hopefully will blossom at some point. But that's the thing that's important, because people like us, the more we talk about it, the more we push back, the more it's going to make that happen. Because the same exact thing happened with COVID. Even though censorship was nearly universal on every single platform, it was false, so it crumbled. The truth eventually rose to the top because it's so much more powerful than anything they could ever put out there. Because what they were putting out there was completely untrue.
That's very true.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, how has this affected you personally? Because, you know, I think it was the day of your graduation, if I remember correctly, where you got a visit from not the feds, but I wrote it down. The Department of Health and Human Services came to your house on the day of your graduation to talk to you about, you know, the fact that you exposed this. Can you talk us through that, if that's okay?
Yeah, they were definitely the feds, for sure.
Yeah, they were the feds.
Okay, they were the feds.
Oh yeah, they had federal badges. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So,
I couldn't imagine opening that door.
Yeah. So it's kind of a funny story, but this was about a month after the story came out. The story came out May 16th, 2023. And I graduated from my surgical training on June 23rd. So I was at my apartment. We were getting ready for the ceremony later that night. It's maybe around like 11, 12 o'clock, and my family was in town. I was getting ready to meet them. And, it's important for people to understand the day you graduate surgical training is one of the most important days of your life, because you sacrifice so much during those 5 years. Important events with your family. You miss so many things you'll never be able to get back. But it's worth it because now you have this privilege of being a surgeon. You have this ability to help so many people. And it's such an amazing accomplishment that the day you graduate is a huge deal. So we're getting ready, and I'm wearing some stupid t-shirt and some shorts I had from college. So it was wasn't ready for anything like this. But all of a sudden I get an aggressive knock on the door. I'm like, man, who is that? So I shuffle over, open the door, and standing outside are 2 federal agents, and they say they're with Health and Human Services. They show me their badges and that they're investigating a case regarding medical records. And at that moment, you just kind of freak out. You never think you're going to be in that situation, right? Like, you always hear about these things in third world countries. Like, I remember reading about this growing up, about political tyranny in other countries, but you never think it's going to show up to your doorstep. And I remember thinking in the moment, like, man, what do I do? I just remember thinking, like, the saying in the doorway was very awkward. So we'll just come inside. So I invite them inside. We sit down, and they wanted to interview me. So they start setting up like a little tripod with a camera and all that. And my wife was getting ready. She comes out, and my wife is a brilliant lawyer. At the time, she was undergoing a background check because she got hired as a assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Texas, which incidentally enough is the same position as a prosecutor who's coming after me, but she's in the Southern District of Texas. So my wife is brilliant. She's like the one who's way smarter than I am. And, she sits down, we both look at each other, and we're like, kind of knew what we had to do. So we excuse ourselves, we go to our bedroom, and, we both say, bad idea, shouldn't talk to them without an attorney present. So we go back out, we tell them, and before leaving, they hand me a target letter. And, I had no idea what that was, a target letter. It's just a piece of paper. And it said that I was a potential target of a criminal investigation. And it was signed by an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Texas. So, the door closes a couple minutes after it opened. And I think to myself, like, how crazy is this? Like we had exposed something that became illegal within 24 hours. And now I'm the one who is under criminal investigation for a crime that never happened. And at that moment, my wife and I are kind of looking at each other, and it's surreal. And, we had this crossroads that, what do we do? Like, do we try to, submit? Do we try to just play along and maybe we could just admit to something and just give them what they want? And maybe all this will go away. Or we were like, no, like, do we fight? Do we try to push back? And we decided to fight because we knew what their intentions were, right? They came to my apartment because they wanted to instill fear, because they wanted to intimidate me.
For sure.
They wanted me so scared because they just wanted me to admit to something so that they could get what they want, to make an example out of me so that they could deter other whistleblowers. And, it's, for them, they're finding out that they had knocked on the wrong door. So we were like, absolutely not. We're going to fight. So
that's good.
Still, it was my graduation. So we thought, well, what are we going to do? So we opened up a couple bottles of champagne. We sat on our patio, and we put on some great music, and we celebrated, and we plotted our war strategy. So it was pretty wild. But it was also right after we talked to Rufo, who put us in touch with our lawyer, and we had talked to her, and she's like this, Shiite Catholic, like rosary in one hand, middle finger in the other, bulldog of an attorney. And we get off the phone with her for the first time. We're thinking, like, man, this lady's crazy, but like in the best way possible. So she's a fighter, and I believe it's divine providence that we're put in touch with each other at the same time, because the timing of the Rufo story and me getting in touch with him, and then this happening on the day of my graduation, and then somehow where we get put in touch with the best possible person, Marcella Burke. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, we watched a podcast, actually. I think it was Dad Saves America. You on it a few weeks ago now. We watched that today, and she was on there. Yeah, she does seem like a fierce lady, and that's what you need in like a lawyer, especially in a case like this. So yeah, it's great that you guys have found each other, and I think it's very telling too, because like you just said before, you haven't committed any crimes here. You're trying to expose a crime. Mm-hmm. And you're the one who's in trouble. To me, it's just very strange. And it shows you, how corrupt this whole thing is, that you've got the federal government going against you, when in reality, it should be the other way around. And it's just insane to me how they've put you in this position where you're effectively, spending loads of money trying to defend yourself from something which you shouldn't even be defending yourself from in the first place. It's just mental to me.
But I love how your wife is very supportive.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
sounds like she's like, we're not going to take any of this BS. We're going to fight for it. And I love that. I just had to say that.
Yeah, no, I
do love that.
And since then as well, I think she's written a letter to Congress, which we'll bring up actually on screen. If we can share our screen, because we're reading through this today.
I'm not even sharing. Hold on.
There we go.
Let's go here.
Yeah.
Oh, that's tiny.
So if you can zoom in a bit, there's 3 pages of this, I think. I think it's 3 pages.
I might have to actually save these images and then, I'm going to save these as images first, because then I can actually zoom in on the computer.
Yeah, because obviously we won't go through it all, but there's a couple of points on here. But I think the overriding theme of the letter is that the investigation wasn't really conducted in a lawful or professional way, and that was highlighted in the letter to Congress, I think.
Yeah, it's so important for people in their position to uphold the standards of the profession. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. Just like I did. When I saw something going wrong in the hospital, I have a responsibility to report it to someone who can do something about it. That's what we did. And what we had exposed was voted to become illegal. And when my attorneys, they saw something was happening, they had pursued the routes available and sent a letter to Jim Jordan in Congress to expose what was happening to average Americans. Because at some point, we forget that these politicians represent us. We are their constituents, and they're in Washington, D.C. to represent us. And really, the content of the letter is phenomenally unbelievable, because you think they pursued this investigation, right? Just looking at the letter, they pursued this investigation, sent agents to my apartment on the most important day of my life without ever reviewing the evidence beforehand. It's like initiating a murder investigation before checking to see if the person's still alive.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like, you want to make sure a crime's been committed before you send people to their house, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy. And then going after my wife, right? She spent her entire life working so hard. My wife's like brilliant. She went to all these fancy law schools and undergrad and all that. And now she's in a position where she has her dream job as an assistant U.S. attorney. And they threaten her if she becomes difficult, right? Which is, you can't even imagine that happening, like, in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And, why else would I speak out, right? Because when these things are happening to me, I want to make sure that I don't deliver my future children into a world where this becomes a standard. Like what kind of society are we going to have if this is allowed to stand? And like, when you think of the risks and benefits in those with those factors, like, the risk I'm taking is comparatively very minimal, because what's happening with the federal government and the Department of Justice, as outlined in this letter, should shock every single American, because I'm just some average guy. If they're doing this to me, they're going to be coming after you next. And, I would hear that, in the news, people would say that. And I thought, no way is that ever possible. But, one day you find them, they show up to your door on the day of your graduation, right? And it happens.
It's just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. The whole thing's crazy, but it's a credit to yourself and your wife and your legal team for even going ahead and fighting this, because these people will do anything to intimidate people, and I think it's very brave what you guys are doing, and it's something what needs to be done, of course. But yeah, there's some very, the letter is great, and it's highlighted the whole case really, and this part was interesting. So yeah, the DOJ prosecutor then admitted that she had never even reviewed the evidence against you. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, well,
the second part. Yeah,
it's hard to believe.
Yeah,
it's like taking someone to surgery without ever talking to them or getting their history beforehand.
Yeah,
right. There's certain standards of your profession, and if you don't maintain those, then what business do you have being in that profession? If I did something like that, I would probably get fired, right? I would probably get my license taken away. So what conclusion can we take from that and apply to this situation? I'll let the people listening make that conclusion for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how does your wife feel about this? I mean, of course, she's doing a great job in supporting you and fighting this, but how does she feel personally, I guess? Because for me, it would feel like a bit of a violation, that someone's come into, my life, if this was me and if this was us, but someone's come into our life and violated us in this way. It would feel very intrusive and just wrong. I mean, how does like your wife and your family feel about this whole thing, I guess?
Well, I can't really speak for her, but I think maybe I can give you an example of maybe that can answer your question. She started working at the DOJ. She goes into work every single day, and cold as ice, cool as a cucumber, right? I mean, she knows what's right and she knows what's wrong. So,
yeah,
it's true for sure. I mean, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think anybody who has any common sense would know what's right and what's wrong, and would sacrifice this cancel culture nonsense to just speak up and just tell the truth, because what is right and wrong. And that's like, I think what we came to realize, like when we started talking about this stuff like a few months ago on the show. We've been talking about this stuff for ages behind the scenes, but at some point we were just like, you know what, we have a lot to say. We know this is crazy and what's happening is only getting worse at the time. And, why don't we just start talking about it? Because we also know that, when you have conversations, that moves things forward and also just brings more awareness, and potentially makes other people feel comfortable to talk about it too. So, even if we have a small channel or a small reach, it's still more than nothing. And so,
I totally believe that, because in the years preceding, my decision to do this, you hear these stories of other people coming out and the risks they're taking. And then you look at your own life and you think, well, I'm in a position where I can do something. And if I don't do something, I'm going to have to live with that shame for the rest of my life. And I think it's the same thing with, with that letter, right? It's like, well, if they didn't do something, they would have to live with that. It's the right thing to do. As a lawyer, you have a responsibility to, zealously represent your clients. And if you want a profession to pass on to your children, you have to do that. But it can't just be something you talk about in conferences or during your meetings. It has to be something that you act out in the real world. But
Yeah.
It all starts with having a conversation, because when people like me and you, we have, we talk about it, the talk becomes, it allows people to understand why it's important. And if they understand it, you can translate that into action. You can make the calculation that the risks become worth it, because the benefits for the future are innumerable. Because what kind of world, right? I mean, it's horrific to think if we didn't fight, what would happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And these days, of course, when you do try and fight and speak out, we get attacked online a lot.
We're called bigots today.
Yeah, we were called bigots today, which of course is a crazy thing. I mean, but we don't really get affected by it. It's because we know that we're not. So it's
they had the flag in their bio, and I said, well, that's a badge of honor coming from you, so thank you.
Take it, right? You take it, and you have to allow it to make you stronger, right? Mm-hmm. Because the more wrath you get, the more closely you're over the target. And if you know what you're doing is right, which this is right, it doesn't matter what anyone says or what happens to you, because the fight for the truth is something that has been a part of human civilization. And we all know what happens if it doesn't if people don't stand for it. So mm-hmm. Yeah, and now people are starting to realize, like, you can get called whatever you want and it doesn't matter, because the threats are empty. The insults have no meaning because they have no substance. So exactly. We'll just keep on speaking out. And the more courage they see, the weaker they become, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And like, once you get that critical threshold, they become powerless. And we're starting to see that, like with Claudine Gay and Christopher Rufo, right? Yeah. So it's, and I think that the same thing applies in our situation. If I were to stay silent in the face of this investigation, like, these people know it's not right what they're doing investigating me. Like, I know it's not right, and they know that I know it's not right. So, like, if the only way it maintains its legitimacy is if I play the role of, like, the accused criminal and like legitimize this kabuki theater, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it all depends on whether I agree to go along, and I completely refuse. And people have that decision. They might feel powerless, but they're not. They could do something about it. They could just refuse to go along, and and they'll realize that they have this strength that they never believed they could have. Because once you do one thing, like, you become so much more brave and courageous, and you realize you can tolerate so much more. I'm sure you guys see it in your own lives, right?
We completely agree. I mean, we just go along with this mantra now that we're just going to tell the fundamental truth. And if you do that, there's nothing to hide, and there's nothing that anyone can really say to you. So, we just mm-hmm. try to be as honest and truthful as we can. I mean, how do you feel about using pronouns and things like this? Because, we definitely don't go along with pronouns, if that makes sense. So if we know for a fact that I can see that this is a man, but they're saying that they're a woman, I'm not going to call them a she. How do you feel about using someone's preferred pronouns, if that makes sense?
If you love someone, you tell them the truth.
Yeah.
Right. If you have someone you care about and they're addicted to drugs, you don't enable that behavior. Mm-hmm. You don't, because you have a belief in their dignity that they can become something greater than what they are in that moment. And if you lie to them, you're just maintaining them in that degraded state.
Absolutely.
So the fact is, the truth can be difficult, right? And so, no, I would not go along with it. Of course, I think there are certain situations, right? If I have someone in clinic, right, and someone I'm seeing, I would just think of different ways. Use their name, right? Avoid using pronouns.
Exactly.
Because there are certain situations as a doctor where there's nothing more important than the person in front of you. All politics aside, you have to take care. I have a responsibility to take care of people who are sick. Doesn't matter if they're transgender or not. Like, you have to take care of that person like it was your own brother or your sister. So, there's a certain behavior that is required as a doctor in order to take care of that person. So I would just use their name.
Yeah, no, that's
said the same thing.
Yeah, that's a safe thing to do. Just use their name, and it's and that's fine. I mean,
just hope for the best.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not to be disrespectful, but we've also come to realize that like whenever we are using these preferred pronouns, that it just feels like a lie. And so it kind of goes back to the whole fundamental truth. It's like, that it's not the truth. You're saying it to yourself and to like people. You're calling, let's say we're calling you she, but really we know you're a he. And sorry, but it just feels wrong. And it does feel like you're kind of enabling like this mental illness, just as like, and I don't know, that the sky is blue or whatever. Like you just know these things, and when you're telling a lie, like that you're also just going against what you believe. Yeah. And it almost feels like your brain is like malfunctioning. And I know it's about pronouns, but it could be.
There's a reason it feels that way, because we're not programmed to be like that. As we're programmed to tell the truth, we know when we're lying because we have this natural reaction to it. And we have this natural ability to identify the truth when we hear it. And people gravitate towards it. And people know when they're hearing something that's not true, because there's like this natural revulsion. There's a reason why it's so hard for other people to maintain these pronoun codes, because they have to try so hard because it's not true. If it was true, they wouldn't have to try.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to like have pins that say it, or it's on my shirt, it's in my bio, it's in my signature, it's I'll wear a sign or show a sign, like, and a lot of it's like where they need to also be affirmed that they are in fact, they're like, let's say I'm transitioning to be a man, like I need this like external validation from people as well, saying yes, you are a man, even though everybody's lying and I'm lying to myself. But it's like that's what they feed off of in order to feel like this identity that they're portraying is true when it's not. And I think that probably most trans people deep down, maybe deep down, know that it's a lie. Like but because like they haven't had the proper mental health support, they still feel lost, even if who they look in the mirror, or who they see when they look in the mirror, is what they thought they wanted. They never had those proper like they never dove deeper into their mental health to actually see what was really the cause of them feeling like they weren't in the right body. And so I think that even if you change everything on the outside, you're still going to feel like there's something wrong on the inside. And, that's the bigger problem as well, which is also really sad, because there's a lot of people who are obviously struggling, who aren't getting that support, and instead just getting fed like hormones or surgeries that we've seen a lot of graphic images of those online. And, I can imagine only feeling worse after like some of these surgeries. And, also just having the choice of being able to have children taken away, and, still left with all these mental health problems and like psychological issues that they never dealt with, that they're probably still dealing with, if not tenfold now. So it's really devastating what's going on. And I think that especially for children, they're just victims in this, and they're being used like cash cows. And it's something that everybody needs to talk about. And I don't understand why there's a debate to not do this to children.
Yeah.
Like what is the problem? Like, why are people so obsessed with wanting to just butcher children? Like that's the thing, is like when you just say it in plain English, like, why are you obsessed with this? Like, why are there like songs and mantras from like trans people or people dressed up in drag saying we're coming after your children? Like it's very creepy and
I think it's
very wrong.
I think it's a societal thing. I mean, we've often made the point on the show that these kids are victims of being born in the wrong society, not being born in the wrong body. And we've made this comparison before, but if these kids were born 20 or 30 years ago and they're around about our age, they'd probably be on YouTube now, speaking to someone like yourself and trying to call this stuff out. And I think it is a case that a lot of these kids are just victims of being born in this society which we're currently in, where they're basically in the eye of a perfect storm, where you have schools, hospitals, governments, workplaces as well, and social media has all compounded this into one entity, and it's just infected all of society. But I do think things are changing. We are seeing some small changes starting to happen. There's people like yourself who are beginning to speak out now, which is fantastic to see. And I really do hope that more people begin to come out and call this stuff out as well. Yeah. I'm conscious of time because I know we've went.
Yeah, we didn't actually ask you how long you have.
I didn't ask you how long you had today.
Oh, how long do you want?
Okay, well, we'll go for a few more minutes. I don't want to keep you for too long. I'll ask you this one more thing. I mean, how do you think things are going to look in a few years? Because I did say there that things are beginning to change. We believe slowly but surely things are changing. Do you think we're at the start of ending this, or do you think this is going to be a permanent part of our society going forward?
I think, especially the past couple, really the past week, there's been very strong indicators that the tides are turning. But I think something like this will always be a part of our society, right? You'll always have these problems. They'll always exist, but it depends on the extent to which it's pervasive. But there's a few things I would like to mention, right? Sure. You had the New York Times article come out a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And for the New York Times to come out with an article that is critical of the transgender ideology is a huge step, because something that's really within this mainstream establishment that had not allowed any dissenting viewpoints to introduce an op-ed that was really, really spoke some truth. I mean, there was some fire in that article. Was a very strong indicator, because all those readers, they're going to see that. And especially when you look at the comment section, that was one thing. Then number two was that the World Health Organization had released their guidance for the gender affirming care. And they said they could not make recommendations for children because the evidence was not adequate. Of course, that's a very light statement, but for the WHO, I mean, that's an indicator that things are changing. And then you had this other whistleblower come out, right? You have more people who are starting to speak against it. Think about the entire developed world in Europe. They're running away from this. More establishment, mainstream liberals, Republicans are starting to realize that this is the wrong thing. And this is all at the time that the medical establishment and then the current administration is just doubling down on the insanity. So the faster we move towards this collision between these two, between what's true and then this ideology, something's going to have to give. And the way things are going, it's going to be the transgender ideology that, if we keep on going the direction, this will eventually fall.
And it's going to be sad to see the fallout from all of this as well in a few years. All of these poor kids who have, gone through all these changes, and in a few years when they realize that they were duped by the medical industry, by schools, by their parents as well, which I think will be the worst thing for them to realize, that their parents have put them through these drastic changes, and they're put in this position in a few years with a mutilated body, a damaged, just their whole being is just destroyed. And it's going to be incredibly sad to see this unfold in a few years.
I think like 10 years from now, a lot of these children will
your two kids, right? Like how much you care about your kids. And I mean, I can imagine it's like the most meaningful thing in the world for you. And I see it, I have two nieces, and to see how much my brother and his wife care about them, it's the most amazing thing ever. And think about these kids, they go through this challenging time when they're teenagers, and then their bodies are completely mutilated, right? They have this chronic pain in their pelvis because of uterine fibroids, right? Vaginal atrophy. You have these young adult men who have the sexual anatomy of a prepubescent child. And at some point they're going to wake up, look in the mirror and think, like, what happened to me? And that the people who were supposed to take care of me were the ones who had sacrificed me. And that, something that every that's such a core aspect of being a human, which is to have a family, is something that's not even possible. And that option has been taken away from you. But it was taken away when you didn't even know what it meant. And it's gone forever. And I couldn't imagine. And we always and we wonder why the suicide rate is so high. I don't think it's that much of a mystery.
Yeah.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, and that's the common misconception that we hear from these trans rights activists, because they always say that the suicide rate's higher with trans people, but it's actually not. It's higher, when they've went through these changes, if that makes sense.
Like detransitioners.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. And there was a famous, I think she's called Chloe Cole, I want to say. She's been very vocal with this, and I think we posted a clip today, and she was saying on this clip that, she looks in the mirror and she thinks that she's a monster when she looks in the mirror. And this is the damage what this does to people. It's just so sad, and and it's just a crime against people. And
yeah. I mean, especially with like young girls, like if they, thought that they wanted to be a boy and they got a double mastectomy, and let's say they only did the top half, or no, full on top and bottom, and then later they want to have children, they can't, and they also know that they'll never have the option to even breastfeed either, and they look back and think, why wasn't anybody there to support me, to tell me that this was wrong? But meanwhile, you had everybody around you at that time saying, this is the path that you're on, this is who you're meant to be, and you were in fact born in the wrong body. And I mean, I know we've already said that, but it's just, how can you tell a child that they're born in the wrong body? I mean, it's not physically possible. Like, you're not trapped in a box. Like you're born just fine.
One thing that's important to consider too, which often gets missed, is that the problems after these surgeries, because it's not only the psychological part where it's like this identification of your true self, but there's this whole other side to it about what happens after these surgeries. I was just reading, United Healthcare had come out with their guidance on gender affirming care, and in their guidance they have a clinical evidence section, and they review some of the studies, and you almost can't believe when you're reading it that they're covering in their insurance policies these procedures, because they do a review of the evidence, and in their guidance they say that after these procedures there's a 75% major complication rate. And for the average person, like, that just seems like a number, right? But what does this mean on like the daily level, right? For a person, right? This is like urinary, vaginal, rectovaginal fistulas. So you'll have stool coming out of your neovagina every single day. You'll suffer we see that. I mean, I see it in other diseases, but I see that often, right? It's when girls are on testosterone, the lining of their vaginas become atrophied, becomes dry. Jamie Reed, the whistleblower from Washington, the original one who came out in February of 2022, she tells a story how a kid came in with massive hemorrhage from her vagina, where it's soaked not only multiple pads, but like a whole towel. And like, that's a whole lot of bleeding. As someone who deals with major bleeding, not uncommonly in the operating room, that's a lot of blood. And it's something we take for granted, just going to the bathroom, like urinating. But after these surgeries, a huge proportion of them have issues with urination. So something that's so routine for us becomes like this daily monumental nightmare. So every minute of every day is going to be planned around these complications. So like, you want to live your life, you want to be happy, but you become tethered to the boundaries of the hospital system in order to manage these nightmares. But this is something that people live with. And like, as someone who takes care of these types of complications, but in different settings, I mean, the lives of these people are you can't even imagine the horror.
Yeah.
And especially when it's compounded with the psychological aspect too.
Yeah, and I mean, especially because these people have a choice that they're making to have these surgeries. You almost want to tell them, like, you don't want to opt into this. Like this, if I had pulled aside somebody who's going through this, but involuntarily, they would tell you, do not. If you're healthy down there, just keep what you've got and learn to accept it, because like it's not worth it. And yeah, like you'll have complications, infections, malfunctions, like it's not an easy road. And then top that off with hormones, but that's the point, is like that you will be tied to the medical industry, which you know does give a reason for the medical industry to push it, because they also know that they'll be making a lot of money from you for a very long time, which is why we call kids like cash cows.
I'll tell you a story where you know, this was one of the things that had really given me provide the impetus for me to do what I did, right? When I was working at the Children's Hospital, this was, you know, 2022, 2021, sometime during that time. And I was taking care of this kid. He was like 14, 15 years old. And he had Crohn's disease, really, really bad inflammatory bowel disease. And, you know, it kind of exists on like this spectrum where some people don't have it that bad. Some people have it really bad. And he had it really bad. So he was in and out of the hospital all the time. And this time he came into the hospital, really bad episode. And when he came in, you know, I got to know him over the course of his stay. And you realize that, you know, my conception of these kids with chronic medical diseases, you think that like their life is very empty because they have so many medical problems. But when I got to know him, you know, it was like the exact opposite, right? He has his friends, he has, you know, like these girls he's kind of going after, you know, he has like a first crush, and he has like his boys that he like rides his bikes around with. And when he comes into the hospital, like the one thing he wants to do is leave the hospital. And when you talk to his parents too, like his parents have these dreams for him, and, you know, they want to see him grow up and go to college and have a life and all these things. But because of his disease, you know, he's tied to the boundaries of the hospital. But it's not because of anything that he did or he chose. Like he was born into this situation. He had no choice. And this is something he has to live with. And all those opportunities are taken away from him because of something out of his control. And eventually he went to the operating room, right, with a really, really bad problem. And after that, I mean, his life is just completely, even how bad it was before, just took a rapid turn downwards. And this is someone who did everything possible to live a full life. And it wasn't that long after that I realized that they're also taking kids who are perfectly healthy, 11, 12 years old, to the same operating rooms that I was just in, and putting puberty blockers into their arms and starting them down this road where they're going to become a chronic medical patient for the rest of their lives. So all the dreams this kid had, right? Like he had no control, but these other kids had a choice, right? But the people who were in their lives, who were supposed to guide them to do the right thing, had started them down this road. So they're going to have their futures completely altered. All those opportunities taken away to have a normal, healthy life, to live apart from the hospital. And they're going to be put in similar situations. And it's like, you know, that was one story. It's like when I experienced that, you think, man, like if I don't do something, that's a very, you know, future generations would never be able to forgive me for it.
For sure.
For sure. And, you know, we've said this before, but you've been great to speak out against this. You know, we can't thank you enough. And I'm sure there's loads of parents around the world who are thanking you as well. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned about the puberty blocking drugs. How much do these things cost exactly? Because they're obviously a lot of money. How much are these parents forking out to get these for their kids?
And how often do they take them every day, I guess, and things like that?
Well, it's an important distinction to know, because, and I really know this until after everything happened, but usually puberty blockers can be given in two different ways. It can be an injection you get like once a month. You know, so a kid would go into the clinic and get an injection. But for certain kids who may, you know, be a little bit more psychologically difficult, right? On the autism spectrum, if they're within that realm. Kids who can't really tolerate needles being in doctor's offices, which is really common. Then those kids who are already vulnerable are the ones who get taken to the OR to have it surgically implanted.
Right.
That's why they have to do it under general anesthesia. So it's already people who are at high risk. So the implants will last for much longer, like 8 to 12 months. And that's the idea, is that you put into their arm, and then that's how it completely blocks the onset of puberty, during the most critical time of development. When you only have one opportunity to become who you're going to be as an adult. And then once that happens, like, that's it. You only have one chance to go through puberty. And that's being taken away from them by blocking the most important hormonal access, which has an effect on every single organ system in their body. But, also to answer the question about the money side of it, that meeting I had with the parents, right? It was both like mothers and fathers of children who got caught up with the transgender ideology. One of them is a prominent individual in California. And he had said when his son got a puberty blocker implanted into his arm, his insurance got a bill for $200,000.
Wow, 200,000.
Wow.
And but there's also he was also saying that in Northern California there are hospitals who are doing these surgeries, and one thing that a lot of people don't know is that in the world of surgery, the orthopedic surgeons rule the OR because they make the most money, because they do bone procedures, they have implants. There's a lot of revenue it brings to the hospital. That's why, for a hospital to have orthopedics is a very lucrative thing. And, it's good because a lot of people break bones. You have to have orthopedics. So they get a lot of operating room time. They have a lot of access to the facility. But in some of these hospitals, I've heard that during this meeting that even the orthopedic surgeons are being pushed out of their OR time to make room for the gender stuff. And for me, that's it. It's a subtle thing, because especially for people who aren't in the world of surgery. But if you say that to anyone who is, they're like, oh my God, how much money are these people making? If they're pushing the orthopedic surgeons around, that's unbelievable. And of course, this is something I've heard. I totally believe it. I would think it's consistent, because United Healthcare is covering it, right? That's what they said. How much reimbursement are they getting for that? It'd be a very interesting thing to know.
True. And it's something you don't really hear about, is the money side of this. So that's why we wanted to ask your opinion on it, because, we do research this a lot, and, there isn't really a consistent number, or it's very hard to kind of find a number. So it's a very vague area, but it kind of shows you, if what you've said is true about the $200,000, I'm sure it is, to be honest, then that tells you all you need to know about why they're pushing this agenda, because there's so much money to be made in it.
Well, and then you have Gavin Newsom, who's offering free sex changes to illegals. If they come to California. Did you hear that?
Did you see that story, what came out a couple of weeks ago?
I didn't, but at this point, I can't necessarily be surprised by anything.
No.
So
it's a very strange thing to offer to anybody, I guess, or that to encourage them to come to California, but that was
for them. I would try to run back over the border, go the other way. Really,
I know. That's what I'd be doing if I'd be going in and I'd hear that. I'd be like, you know what? Actually,
let's go back.
My house wasn't that bad. I'm gonna go back. I'm good. Can I get a?
They start going to public schools and they start getting indoctrinated. They'll probably run back to Honduras and Guatemala and be like, oh, you know what? It wasn't so bad. It's kind of crazy.
I just have to wear a wig. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, it is. It is weird. It's a strange thing to promote, really. But like you said, nothing's really surprising anymore. You hear it, you're like, what? Okay, yeah. Is that really shocking? No, I guess not. Not anymore.
It's went beyond satire. It's gone way beyond that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we're coming up to an hour and a half, so we'll leave it there. I don't want to keep it for too long. I did say 20 minutes ago that was the last question, and we've actually kept you for 20 minutes longer. So appreciate.
Well, is there anything that you would like to say?
Is there anything you'd like to add actually before we go?
I'll say that there's a lot of people who are probably like on the fence about doing something like this. They know they're in a position that they can blow the whistle on something in their institution that is wrong or criminal, but they're scared of the risks. And when you're making these calculations, you think that like if you do it on the other side, it's just going to be like this world of darkness. But the one thing I've realized is that when you do it, there's this entire universe of people who are willing to support you. Like you think you're going to step out onto a cliff and you're just going to free fall, but you actually realize like you get to this other world and like the grass is way greener. Like there's millions of people who are out there. And, I've seen that with how much support we've gotten. And, if anyone's interested in supporting us, we have a Give, Send, Go set up, givesendgo.com /Texas_whistleblower. And, every single comment, my wife and I read them every single night. And it means more than words can describe, because every dollar that goes there goes directly into the fight. So, it's if people want their kids to live in the same society that you grew up in, then the only thing we can do now is fight back. And I just want to thank you guys too for, your first, video you guys did. I thought that was so cool. And,
we still couldn't believe it when we saw the comment the other day. We're like, is this the real Dr. Heim we're seeing here? And
like I said, we were kind of like, would somebody really make a username up and everything?
Yeah,
maybe just
would there be like a fake Dr. Heim? We weren't so sure. So, as soon as we saw it, we're like, right, we need to get in touch with him and try and
put it in the chat for everybody as well.
We'll also link this in on the show at the end as well. So if anyone wants to
X, so I'm gonna have to do that separately on X.
Yeah, we'll link it in on X as well, just so if there's anyone who wants to help and donate, then they can. And that's great how you've got a lot of support with this, and I hope it continues, because what you're doing is important for sure. And
it's a pretty penny, but it's worth it. But
definitely.
For sure, like the support would mean a lot.
Every dollar we've spent, which is a huge amount, it has been completely worth it. So it's, for us, we see it as like an investment, right? It's like what better investment than to fight back against these people who constantly just try to spit in our face, tell us lies, right? And try to take away our freedom, right? And try to do this to kids. So what better way to fight back than that?
Your future children as well.
And I think what you were saying earlier, I think you'll be on the right side of history with this. So definitely. I think in like a few years' time, you're going to get you're going to get the credit that you deserve, for sure.
That would be fine too, because it's like, no matter what happens, right? If you stand for the truth, it doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you'll stand for, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. So
definitely. Well, we'll leave it there. We'll pop you backstage just while we do just while we say goodbye on the show and stuff, and then we'll have a brief chat backstage and things like this.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Cool. All right.
Yes, that was Dr. Heim. An absolute pleasure to speak to him. A bit surreal, of course, as well, because we were not expecting him to come on our show. So hope you guys enjoyed it. What he's doing. I mean, we've talked about this to death now. I mean, we've talked about Dr. Heim the most out of anyone this year, I think. We've talked about a story several times. Lots of times. So to actually have him on the show was a real pleasure. And he's someone that we really admire with what he's done and the bravery that he's got to come forward and try to expose this. And look at what's happened since. Look at what's look at the storm what he's caused with coming forward with this information. And I think what you're going to see now is more and more people like Dr. Heim coming forward with their own stories and exposing this. So it's great to see, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's very inspiring. And also just, you know, it is encouraging, like, to use your voice and to take action, you know. You know, it's inspired a lot of people probably online as well, just, you know, to have these conversations. And we've said it many times on the show before, but, you know, having conversations does move things forward. And so, you know, if you are worried about this cancel culture, I mean, just fight back. Like, what are you going to get canceled for? Especially as an average person. I mean, is it worth just kind of keeping your feelings to yourself when you know the truth? And, you know, when you know things are wrong, you know, you shouldn't just hide. You should use your voice to your power.
Absolutely.
Even if you think, well, who am I? Well, you're going to be that one other person who sparks a conversation.
Exactly.
Do it with your friends, do it with your family, do it on social media, you know, just fight back and just keep the conversation going. And yeah, just like we said, like, the truth always comes out. So if you guys keep spreading the truth, it's going to pay off eventually.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. Just before we go, if you're brand new to our channel and you like the stuff we talk about, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. We go live every night, 8 p.m. Eastern. We will be back tomorrow. We're doing a review of The War on Children, which is the new movie.
Yeah. I was going to ask him about
what's just come out. We're going to watch it straight after this show, and we're going to do a review tomorrow. We'll probably post a couple of clips on X as well. And then on Thursday, we've got Taylor Silverman coming on the show, who was the skateboarder who spoke out a couple of years ago now, and she's been on Fox News on Piers Morgan as well.
Yeah, she's a women's rights and women's sports advocate. So
yeah, so we're looking forward to speaking to her as well.
For sure.
So thanks so much, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Take it easy.